He was the first thing I saw that wasn't human. I remember the moment like a bad photograph, grainy, edges burned. It was a late October when the fog in the holler hung so low the trees looked like the backs of sleeping giants. I moved back to my grandfather's place because the city had a way of hollowing me out. The house was smaller, the land louder. Nights there are a different kind of dark, not just absence of light, but a weight, the forest pressing in with breath and patience. You learn the rhythms, the coyotes at hour 2, the slow sigh of the creek, the pop of a branch when a deer crosses. Those sounds were familiar. What came after was not. The first week, nothing happened except the ordinary things that make a place feel lived in. A neighbor's truck idling at the end of the lane until 1 a.m., the radio in the bait shop playing an old gospel song that seemed too bright for the dead leaves. I took long walks, camera in my hand, looking for empty frames to fill. There are trails people don't use anymore, overgrown, mapped only by memory and lichen. I tried those trails because memory makes the past less lonely. On my third night, I woke to the smell. It was the kind of animal stink that hits you after a storm. Damp fur and iron, and something sweet and sour underneath it, like old blood warmed in the dark. It came through the little window above the kitchen sink, the glass file of a distant road. I told myself it was a raccoon, a fox, something an hour's drive into wilderness would expect. I should have stayed with that explanation. The first strangeness came as tracks. Morning light revealed prints in the soft mud by the creek. Not quite hooves, not quite paws. 2 longer impressions at the front, then a split. They were too long to belong to any deer I knew, and they pressed too deep, as if the thing that made them carried its weight on the tips of something hard and wrong. I followed them because that's what you do when curiosity tastes like cotton in your mouth. The prints threaded between the birch like punctuation marks, cut a path deeper where light thinned to a bruise. I began to notice the trees, notches scraped high where branches met bark, as if someone or something used the trunks as a measuring stick. Hollow branches hummed occasionally, a low, unused sound I couldn't place. At dusk, in the spaces between trunks, 2 small yellow things gleamed like coins left on a mantle. When I looked directly, they vanished. Not blinked, vanished. The hair on my arm stood in rows that didn't move. That same evening, I found tufts of dark hair snagged on a low branch, coarse and matted, smelling of iron and old smoke. I took a picture, hands trembling. The photo developed into static and a smear I couldn't explain. People in town told stories like they were recipes. Old Tom swore he saw the devil up on Cold Mountain, they'd say, smiling like a knife. They said the woods take things or give them back wrong. I used to laugh at those stories. I stopped laughing when I heard the other sound. Not an animal, not the wind, but a slow, deliberate drag through undergrowth. A sound that made the old wood in the house answer with its own small complaints. I began to understand that whatever lived in those trees did not belong to any folder in my brain labeled animal or myth. It belonged to the place itself, carved into the long, patient dark. That night, I waited on the porch with a thermos of coffee gone cold, listening for the drag. The sound came, and with it the scent. And beyond the halo of my lantern, something moved, tall, too thin, with a silhouette that made the hair at my neck feel like pins. It had horns. After that first sighting, everything rearranged itself into a long, awful logic. The forest stopped being a place and became a clock, each creak a tick, each rustle a minute lost. I thought I could outwalk it, outthink it, treat it like a puzzle. I was wrong. The thing is not clever in the way we measure cleverness. It is patient. It learns the soft habits of a man who keeps his beer cans in the shed and his loneliness in his chest. Sleep left me in scraps. When I did sleep, my dreams were not so much dreams as rehearsals of later terrors. Waking on the floor of the living room, the TV still on, the static painting its own language. The kitchen window smeared with something that looked like the palm of a hand, but wasn't. I'd wake sweating, tasting metal on my tongue, and the house would be too quiet, an eager kind of quiet that felt like waiting. The first night I heard it at the screen door, I thought maybe a branch had fallen. Then I heard humming under the scrape, a low, wet rasp, and the porch light clicked itself on, slow as if someone had learned the rhythm of my switch. It started with small thefts. food from the pantry rearranged into neat, beastly piles. My boots moved from by the door to the foot of my bed. I found once a single, perfect circle of ash in the middle of the living room rug, and when I swept it into the sink, the water ran red for 3 whole seconds before clearing. I told myself not to notice. I told myself the mind will stitch a lie to keep you sane. But the mind is a poor tailor against the weight of the forest. People in town leaned away when I told them details. They knew how much to share. A half memory about a church bell rung during a drought, a name muttered low. My grandfather, the one who had died 2 winters before I moved home, left me a tin box with a paper inside folded like an accusation. The paper had instructions, a map of lines to avoid, a prayer scratched into the margin, and a warning to never let it see your face in full light. I laughed at the superstition then. I don't laugh anymore. At dusk, the yellow eyes returned, but closer. They tracked me across the yard like black holes taking shape. I began to find things on the porch, tufts of hair tied into knots like postal seals, a child's shoe I didn't own, stones arranged into words that read wrong under the moon, names that were not mine, and then became mine when I blinked. The creature learned my language the way a river learns the contour of a valley, slow, inevitable. Once, standing at the sink, I heard my own voice, clear as a bell, calling from the hallway. "Sam?" I answered without thinking. The voice repeated, softer, pulling into the walls. It had my inflection. It had my doubt. When I followed it, the hallway was empty, and the back door hung open into the night like a mouth. There were changes in me, small and rotten. I began to check the windows, not to watch for it, but to see whether I was still the same shape behind the glass. I caught myself rehearsing what I'd say if someone asked whether I'd been sleeping. My hands grew faster at knots, unraveling cords that seemed to bind my house with the same patience as the thing beyond. I stopped trusting mirrors. Once, when shaving, I watched my reflection for too long, and on the 3rd pass of the razor, the glass fogged, though there was no steam. 2 indentations appeared beside my pupils, like the faint impression of horns pressing from the inside. I rubbed my eyes until the world reasserted itself, but the hollowness under my skin didn't go away. The twist, if you can call it a twist, and not the simple unspooling of a man's mind, came with the sound that could not be explained away, a slow, deliberate knocking that answered every creak of the house, as if the thing outside was keeping beat with me. The knock was not on the door. It moved from wall to wall, behind plaster, beneath floorboards, like something learning where I hid my heartbeat. It spelled a rhythm I knew by muscle. It was the same rhythm my grandfather used to tap when he counted sinners out loud. I started to hear the rhythm in my own bones. One morning, I found a child's drawing pinned to the bulletin board. A crude outline of a figure with horns and yellow eyes and a name scrawled beneath in my own handwriting, except I had never written it. The letters crawled along the page like ants. I tore it down and kept it folded under my mattress. At night, the house seemed to breathe around it. In the hush between midnight and the cold gray that comes before dawn, I realized the most dangerous thing wasn't the horned shape standing just beyond sight. It was that the thing was learning how to be me. It wore patience like a coat and imitation like jewelry. It had begun to take the smallest bits, my voice, my steps, my trash, and arrange them into a map leading back to whatever hollow it called home. When the wind lifted the curtain and I saw those yellow eyes at the bedroom window, level with mine, I understood 2 truths. First, that it knew where I kept my fear. Second, that whatever came next would not be surprised. I thought I could fight a thing that learns me the way a mirror learns a face. I was wrong about that too. The paper my grandfather left me became a liturgy and a map folded into my palm like a confession. It told me where the old lines cut through the land, places the forest respected and places it did not. It had a prayer, half inked, half scrawled, the letters smeared as if the pen had trembled with cold. There was also a list of things to do if the knocking began to answer you. Light salt, speak the name you fear out loud, never look it in full light. I did all of them. I spread salt in a half circle by the door until my hands bled salt into the cracks. I spoke the name that had been put into my mouth like a seed. I left every lamp in the house on until morning star burned thin. None of it unmade what had already learned my voice. the mimicry got better. Where at first it had only echoed my call, it soon rehearsed the subtleties. The way I swallowed when I lied, the hesitation in the vowels when I tried to soften a truth. It cued the sounds of my life back at me in a voice that carried my father's cadence and my grandfather's cough. Once it even sang, on some crooked pitch, the lullaby my mother hummed when I was too small to know grief. I watched it on the porch one night as it tried to fit my face into the dark like a hand into a glove. It practiced my smile until its mouth split wrong and the horn stubs at its temple caught the light. I tried to catch it. I set up the old camera with a tripod my grandfather used to favor, aimed at the path between the birches. I left a plate of food on the porch, a bait for whatever appetite lived outside. When I checked the camera, the files were corrupted in the center, a black smear that crawled at the edges as if the pixels refused to sit still. But the audio held, a recording of my own voice whispering my name until it bled into something else, a scraping syllable that wasn't human at all. The night it came to the door, the knocking followed the rhythm my grandfather used to count sins by. 1, 2, 3, pause. 1, 2, 3, pause. I knew the pattern in my bones as if I'd been taught it at birth. I opened the door a sliver and looked out into the halo of the yard light. The thing stood there, not fully lit, horns casting twin crescents across its silhouette. It held something in its hands, my grandfather's tin box, the paper folded exactly as I'd left it. It had my handwriting across the top. "Sam," it said in my voice, soft and patient. "Sam, come home." I had a knife then, an old kitchen blade heavy with rust. I raised it because some instinct kept insisting on blood as an answer. I would have stabbed if the shape before me had been only a body. But what stood there was my face in a bad glass. The mouth moved like mine, the eyes blinked on the same startled interval. With each breath, it mirrored the sound of air leaving my lungs. I lowered the knife because killing a shadow is a kind of surrender I wasn't ready to own. It stepped closer until the porch groaned. The cold there was deep and real, like the throat of the earth opening. It put the tin box on the step and set its hand on the lid, imitation gentle. For a second, I saw my grandfather in the gesture. Not a memory, but a theft. The thing could mimic grief. I reached for the paper with the map. When I unfolded it, the lines had shifted, as if the ink had been alive and uncomfortable. The prayer in the margin read differently, letters rearranged into a sentence I didn't remember learning. Give him light. Giving light was giving sight. I turned toward the house and flicked every lamp to full, filling the porch with glare so sharp it felt like a blade. The thing recoiled, not from light but from being seen. For a heartbeat, I thought I had won. Then it laughed, a sound that was almost my laugh, but with something old and hollow inside, and lifted its face. In the bright, its eyes were yellow and patient and impossibly human. On the crown of its head, where my reflection should have been, 2 small horns pushed through skin as if from the inside out. I watched them grow the way you watch ice take shape. Inevitable. Crystalline. It reached for my face with the same slow courtesy my grandfather used to show when he adjusted my collar. Its fingers pressed to my temples, warm and damp. For a moment, the world narrowed to the press of palms and the rattle of breath. I could not tell whether it meant to mark me or to merge. When it spoke again, it did not speak my name. It said, in a voice that had learned 1,000 small inflections of me, "He lives in the Appalachians. He lives in the Appalachians."
Subscribe to Horror Story